Hello. For this Dating the Old Testament video, I decided to break the pattern of doing a video for a book of the Old Testament. And instead, I decided to do a special topic on biblical archaeology. So I created a top 20 list of biblical archaeological discoveries and thought I would go through the list. This video is going to discuss um, discoveries rank from number 20 down to number 11. So this won't be the top 10 yet, it'll just be the second 10. Let me share the screen. Okay, the top 20 list of biblical discoveries. Now, whenever somebody makes a top 20 list, you sometimes are not sure what criteria they are using. And if they do a top 20 list of this type for biblical archaeological discoveries, there really may be several different things which they have in mind, like, does the discovery confirm a biblical story? Is it like proving something from the Bible? That would be one criterion. Or does it shed light on the Bible? That would be really kind of a different criterion. Or does it just add to our general knowledge of the life and times in the Middle East or in the land of the Bible? That would be yet a third kind of thing. And then some of them are just discoveries which are kind of cool and topics of general interest. So lists like this can be fun, and everybody can kind of argue with putting different things in a list or ordering them differently. So I wouldn't insist that my list is correct or that even my order is correct, but these are things which were interesting to me. So starting with number 20, I'm already going to kind of break the rule here. This isn't really a single archaeological discovery, rather it's a project. And I put it on the list primarily because it's the one archaeological thing that I had a small role in participating in when I traveled to Israel a few years back. This was the Temple Mount Sifting Project. And what it was in 1999, the Islamic Authority, which kind of controls things around the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, removed with some heavy machinery about 9,000 tons of soil from the vicinity of the Temple Mount before the government halted them. They weren't supposed to be doing that, but they did it. And so in doing so, they probably damaged what would have been a lot of valuable archaeological ground to dig in, although it never would have been dug in anyway. But since it was done, there was a group that decided that they would sift through all the dirt that had been removed. And so they set up this Temple Mount Sifting Project. And to go through it, they employed volunteers to do it. So they would bring you really a bucket of dirt and you would kind of sift through that and see what you found. So they found all kinds of odds and ends, nothing that was really earth shattering, but a great deal of stuff, including, for example, 7,000 coins. This is just one example of the sort of thing that they found. And I thought I would mention coins because my wife found one coin from the Ottoman Turkish era when she was going through her pile of dirt. Anyway, here are a couple of coins. One is from the Persian era, so around about the time of Ezra, maybe. And it has, you can't really read it very well from here, even if you read Hebrew, but it has a design on the coin along with the letters for Judah. And then on the right, you have another coin of the type that was minted under Herod the Great. So that's the Temple Mount Sifting Project. Number 19, Ostrocons. One of the things, the ways that writing could be preserved is on pottery. Pottery kind of lasts forever, doesn't really wear down. And so sometimes they would write on pottery. And that, when that happens, that tends to be preserved. So there are ostracons at places like Arad, a city in southern Israel, or Lachish, and they have some writing preserved on them. And in Arad and Lachish, they one of the things that which they found was it tells a little bit about the environment and some of the things which were going on around about 600 BC. That's shortly before the Babylonian exile. And it reflects some of the pressure that they were on and a few things that they were dealing with and a few things about the culture at the time. And one thing which was a little bit of a surprise is that at Arad, I think, where they had a military garrison that wasn't really large, they looked at the different Ostrocons and determined that there were quite a few different soldiers who had written on them, implying that there was maybe a higher level of literacy than people generally assumed. This is a text of one of the Ostrocons, which says, "To my Lord Eliashib, may Yahweh inquire after your well-being. And now give to Shamariah a measure of flour, and to the Kerasite you will give a measure of flour. And concerning the matter about which you commanded me, it is well. He is staying in the house of Yahweh." So, Ostrocons. Now, ossuaries. So let's bring forward, this is a little bit later in time. There was a very short period of time in Jerusalem where they got in the habit of taking men's bones about a few months after they had died and then placing them in these boxes called ossuaries. And that time period just happened to be the New Testament writing type of time period. And so this is an ossuary which has a small inscription on the side of it. And it says, "James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus," on the inscription. So if that was genuine, that would imply that this ossuary contained the bones of James, who's the James mentioned in the New Testament, both in Acts chapter 15 and some other places, and probably the author of the letter of James in the New Testament. So why is something as significant as this down so far as number 18? Well, there's a couple reasons. And one is that whether that inscription, I mean, the ossuary is genuine, but whether the inscription is genuine is debatable. Biblical Archeology Review, which is a very reputable publication, has argued vehemently that this is genuine. The Israel Antiquities Authority has pronounced that it is fraudulent, that the inscription is fraudulent and was a fraud, a later fraud. And honestly, it's beyond my expertise to be able to weigh in one way or the other. Part of the problem in determining a thing like that is an archaeological discovery is much more valuable if you can document it in the place where it was discovered. And that was not done for this case. I mean, this showed up on the antiquities market, and so somebody had access to it before it was really made available to the professionals, so to speak. So that leads to doubt about it. And you might can guess with what I had talked about on the Temple Mount Sifting project, you had a little bit of that same thing too. You knew it came from the Temple Mount area, but it was all in a pile of dirt, so everything was jumbled up and you don't know necessarily what era in time the things which you might dig up came from. So that is a debatable ossuary, but perhaps a little bit more valuable would be this one, which says, that inscription says, "Joseph, son of Caiaphas," and it is generally agreed that this is the ossuary that has the bones of Caiaphas, the high priest, who was prominent in the New Testament, really an adversary of Jesus. Number 17. This is the temple mourning inscription that was used in the New Testament time period. And this inscription around the Temple Mount says, "No stranger is to enter within the balustrade round the temple and its enclosure. Whoever is caught will be himself responsible for his ensuing death." Now, by stranger, it means no Gentile. So it sheds a little bit of light on this particular passage in the New Testament. When Paul has come back to Jerusalem, it says about it when the Jews in the area were extremely upset and they seized Paul. It says, "For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Then all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple. Acts 21, 29, and 30. This number 16 is what they have nicknamed the Jesus boat, or the Sea of Galilee boat. A few years back, when there was something of a drought and the level of the Sea of Galilee dropped some, it uncovered this boat, which they pulled out. The remains of it, obviously not in great shape right now. They carbon dated it, and they found it in the time range 40 BC plus or minus 80 years. So maybe a little bit before or up to about the time of Jesus's ministry, implying that this would be the type of boat that Jesus and his disciples were in multiple times in the Gospels. Nothing to connect it with Jesus directly, except that its time frame is about right. The boat is 27 feet long by 7.5 feet wide and a depth of 4.3 feet. So it could hold a number of people. And number 15, the Pool of Bethesda. Let's look at this passage from John chapter 5. Now there's in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred, and while I am going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now, once upon a time, there were some critics who had kind of challenged the idea that the Gospel of John had much in it that was historical, and this was one of the passages which they mentioned because they presumed that it was written quite a long time after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, and so that John had just sort of made this up about the sheep gate pool. But actually, this pool, which has 5 roofed colonnades, was discovered, and this is it. And you can see there's a lot of up and down in the area, so somebody who was kind of lame might have difficulty getting into the pool. Okay, number 14, the Sennacherib Prism. This is a prism written by the Assyrians, and it describes their invasion of Judah from the Assyrian perspective. In the Bible, this topic is covered in detail in Acts 36 and 37, in 2 Kings 18, and in 2 Chronicles 32. Let me read the first verse there. It says, "In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them." So that one verse, you can imagine in the Bible, describes a rather distressing situation when the king of Assyria captures all the fortified cities of Judah and takes them. But then the rest of the passage talks about his attempt to capture Jerusalem, and he can't do it, and the Lord delivers the city in a miraculous fashion. Well, as you might guess, if the Assyrians describe that story, they tell it a little bit differently. Let me read the passage which it says here on the prism. "As for the king of Judah, Hezekiah, who had not submitted to my authority, I besieged and captured 46 of his fortified cities, along with many smaller towns, taken in battle with my battering rams. I took as plunder 200,150 people, both small and great, male and female, along with a great number of animals, including horses, mules, donkeys, camels, oxen, and sheep. As for Hezekiah, I shut him up like a caged bird in his royal city of Jerusalem. I then constructed a series of fortresses around him, and I did not allow anyone to come out of the city gates. His towns, which I captured, I gave to the kings of Ashdod, Ekron, and Gaza." Okay, now anytime you have a dictatorial regime and they're trying to put out a news release, you can't entirely trust the news release unless you're especially good at reading between the lines. And let me suggest that this Prism's account actually doesn't contradict very much the Bible account at all. The Bible account does say that the king of Assyria captured all the fortified cities of Judah, but it also says that it didn't capture Jerusalem. Now, let's read between the lines here in the red part. It says, "As for Hezekiah, I shut him up like a caged bird in his royal city of Jerusalem." Well, you might want to think a little bit about that. The purpose of a siege is not to shut someone up in a city. The purpose of a siege is to capture the city. So, in effect, the prism admits that he never did capture Jerusalem. It's a case of one of the 600 or 700 BC examples of spin, we might call it. Number 13, the Shalmaneser obelisk. Shalmaneser was a king of Assyria before, a little bit before Sennacherib, 858 to 824 BC. And this obelisk contains many scenes and descriptions of things which happened during his reign. This one is most interesting because the figure kneeling in the center there is Jehu, the king of Israel, the northern kingdom. He's bowing down before Shalmaneser. Now, there's not a story in the Bible about him doing this, but it's not surprising that this sort of thing would have happened. If you remember at all the story about Jehu, he conducts a rather violent purge in which he kills Jezebel, who was the queen mother and the daughter of the people in Lebanon, was where she came from. So he's kind of made enemies with the Lebanese. The northern kingdom of Israel was almost always at war with the kingdom of Aram to their northeast. And Jehu also killed, in what was probably really an overreaction, he killed the king of Judah, who was trying to recover from a wound in a battle in his kingdom. And so now Jehu has made enemies to the north, to the northeast, and even to the south. He's really surrounded himself with enemies. He needed to go find a friend. So he goes to a rather powerful kingdom not too far away, to the Assyrians, and tries to make friends with them. And maybe the most significant thing about this is in Israel, they did not typically make images of their people or their kings or anybody. And as a result, we don't have any images of any of the kings of Israel, except for this one, which was not made in Israel, but made by the Assyrians. So it's the only image we have of an Israelite king. Number 12, Shishak invasion record. This is from Egypt. This is the Karnak temple of Pharaoh Shoshink I that the Bible calls Shishak. He reigned from 943 to 922 BC. And while he was king, he conducted an invasion of the land of Israel. And there's mention of this in the Bible. It says in 1 Kings 14:25, this is just after Solomon has died and his son Rehoboam is the king in Judah. It says in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took away everything. He also took away all the shields of gold that Solomon had made. Now, this is the first time in the Bible that a Pharaoh is named. In all the books of Moses, as you recall, it talks about Pharaoh and the king of Egypt, but it never does give a name, not the Pharaoh of Joseph or the Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph or the Pharaoh that oppressed Israel when there was an Exodus. None of those Pharaohs get a name, but in 1 Kings, it does give a name to this one. And that allows you actually to help sync the biblical timeline with Egyptian chronology, because Rehoboam and Shishak were now contemporaries. So that's helpful for historians. And finally, on my number 20 countdown through number 11, there's the Pontius Pilot inscription. I don't know how easily you can see from that blown up image the writing on there, but if you can read a little bit of Latin, you could make out something of that inscription. I put in bold the letters that are present, and the letters that are absent are in brackets. The letters that are absent, of course, are mostly speculated, but you can be pretty sure about what those are. And what it says is, to the divine Augustus, this Tiberium, Pontius Pilot, prefect of Judah, has dedicated this. So Tiberium, or Tiberius, is the Caesar, when Pontius Pilate is the governor. And so this stone was set up in the city of Caesarea by the Pontius Pilate, who is named and is prominent in the New Testament. So that's my countdown of biblical archaeology discoveries, counting down from 20 to 11. I hope to come back before too long and count down with top 10. Thank you for watching, and I hope to make another video soon.